The pilots who flew it were really quite astounded by the high degree of control effectiveness they did have over this configuration.
There were occasional accidents during the test flight program. On one occasion, the fuel line of the 173 was blocked, and it came down on Lordship Beach in Connecticut, much to the surprise of the local sunbathers. But the plane flew so slowly, almost like a helicopter, that it came down gently on the sands and was undamaged.
Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the United States faces the difficult task of capturing island bases and building airstrips. A vertical takeoff fighter could solve these problems. The U.S. Navy orders a full-scale fighter version of the Flapjack. This new fighter aircraft is designated the XF-5U. With a takeoff and landing speed of just 40 miles per hour, it can reach a top speed of 500 miles per hour, phenomenal for any fighter of its day. The speed and agility of the XF-5U could match any jet fighter in service. The XF-5U is powered by two powerful Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engines. It is armed with 6 Browning machine guns and can hold 2 1,000-pound bombs. But other engineers are also exploring the saucer-shaped wing. In Nazi Germany, work has begun in secret to develop a prototype aircraft nicknamed the Flying Beer Tray.
The Germans were intrigued by the low aspect ratio wing, but they never actually made the breakthrough that Zimmermann had towards putting the engines on the side of the wings.
The prototype fighter version of the Flapjack is finally rolled out of the factory on June 25, 1945. But things are quickly changing in the world of aeronautics.
We were undergoing a radical paradigm shift in aeronautics, and that paradigm shift was from the era of the propeller-driven, piston-powered airplane to the era of the turbojet.
The imperative to develop jet engine technology at the end of World War II was very, very strong. Piston engine aircraft design and technology had just about reached the end of the road.
In 1946, the XF-5U is finally unveiled to the public. But stories began appearing in the media, speculating that the unusually shaped plane is just a cover for a top-secret flying saucer program. This does not endear Zimmermann's Flying Flapjack to the conservative military.
By 1947, Zimmermann had solved all the problems, and the aircraft was ready for its first flight. And suddenly, the United States Navy cancelled the entire project and ordered the prototype to be scrapped.
What is incomprehensible to me is after having gone to all this trouble and investing the sums of money necessary to bring this aircraft to fruition, the aircraft would be willfully destroyed before first flight, because it would have been very, very valuable to the subsequent history of STOL aircraft development and subsequent use and employment of STOL aircraft if we had the data from an aircraft such as the XF-5U-1 to place alongside the data from the V-173.
Zimmermann's pursuit of a vertical takeoff fighter was not forgotten. But it was not until the 1970s that the U.S. military finally acquired this type of aircraft, Britain's Harrier jump jet. Ultimately, Zimmermann's Flapjack was sidelined by the United States' interest in a new technology, jet power. You are watching Secret Allied Aircraft of World War II here on the History Channel. In August 1939, 2 weeks before the Nazis invaded Poland, a unique visitor arrives in America for a special demonstration of the latest U.S. military planes. He is Ernst Udet, the man in charge of aircraft development for Hitler's new air force, the Luftwaffe. Udet isn't impressed by the latest American planes he sees, and he knows that Germany has already begun to build a plane that is light years ahead of America's best. The world's first jet fighter, the Heinkel 280.
The story of the United States and the jet engine is a story of acute national embarrassment. We had several governmental commissions as late as 1939, indeed after the time period when the first jet airplanes were flying, that actually made pronouncements that the turbojet airplane was an impossibility.
Yet some imaginative engineers were already thinking about jet propulsion, despite official opposition to the idea.
Lockheed had a reputation as a company that was willing to undertake bold and innovative design. In the Second World War, Lockheed applied this to the turbojet revolution.
Lockheed had, for many, many years, a very unique engineer named Nathan Price. He was one of the paper inventors of jet engines. He became a believer in jet engines.
In the time period where Nate was working on the engine, where we were examining it, and everybody that could follow his notes examined it, and we could find nothing wrong with what he was doing. We designed an airplane to go around two of those engines, a fighter. We had never had a supersonic airplane by that time, and we were reasonably sure that this airplane would probably be capable of supersonic speeds.
The aircraft designed by Nathan Price and Willis Hawkins is America's first attempt at a jet fighter plane. Called the Lockheed Model L-133, it is designed around a canard layout, meaning the control fins used to climb and dive are located at the front of the aircraft. The L-133's revolutionary features make it an aircraft well ahead of its time.
It had, in its original concept, an afterburner. And nobody had ever talked about an afterburner in Great Britain or in the United States or Germany that I know of.
But the L-133 is never built. Before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States military was not convinced that jet aircraft are feasible. But a trip to Great Britain by a senior U.S. officer changes everything.
In April of 1941, Hap Arnold, who was the chief of the Army Air Corps at that time, soon to be the Army Air Forces, goes to England. He says to his host, in effect, you know, some of my technical people are telling me, as odd as this may sound, that perhaps we should be looking at gas turbines. And the answer he gets is, absolutely. Do you want to see our airplane?
Arnold is shown the Gloucester-Whittle prototype, the first British turbojet airplane. Arnold is stunned. Having ignored Nathan Price and Willis Hawkins, the United States is now years behind. Arnold makes the bold decision to seek out America's long-ignored aviation geniuses and offer them lucrative research contracts. His mission, to put the U.S. on the cutting edge of aviation technology. One of the first to accept the challenge is Jack Northrop from Newark, New Jersey.
Jack Northrop is an absolutely extraordinary individual. If you looked at the individuals who transformed American aviation in the 1920s and 30s, and you considered all the engineers and all the scientists, you would have to recognize that the designer and industrialist who did the most to make this transformation a reality was Jack Northrop.
Like Charles Zimmerman, Northrop sees the design flaws of conventional planes. He questions the use of a heavy fuselage. For longer range missions, why not simply have a flying wing, saving weight and fuel? Northrop presents Hap Arnold with a design for a flying wing bomber that can fly non-stop from the continental United States to Berlin, a round trip of 6,000 miles. Arnold immediately orders a test plane. It is called the N9. These are the days before computers, and no one has designed a flying wing that is stable in flight. Jack Northrop has the answer. He attaches special slats to the leading edge of the wing. If the plane flips over, the slats deploy automatically to regain balance. Ground testing of the N9 begins December 20th, 1942, 1 year after Pearl Harbor. The first flight takes place in the Mojave Desert on December 27th. Northrop's flying wing is a success. He now approaches Hap Arnold with another bold idea. Fit the N9 with a rocket motor to make it capable of taking on the new German jets. The first prototypes reveal yet another Northrop innovation.
Like the Wright Flyer, the pilot lay on his stomach, controlling this aircraft to give it absolutely minimal frontal profile.
On July 5, 1944, America's first manned rocket plane, called the XP-79A, makes its first flight.
Now, Northrop had wanted to power this aircraft with a very exotic rocket engine called the rotojet. But the rotojet was so incredibly dangerous, and its development was so torturous, that instead the decision was reached to power it with two Westinghouse jet engines.
The Army calls this version the XP-79B. Embodying another revolutionary idea, it will be a flying chainsaw.
The XP-79, sometimes called the Flying Ram, was an airplane that was armored with 4 50 caliber machine guns, and it also had reinforced leading edges on its wing because it was hoped that it could actually ram and survive a ramming of an enemy aircraft, typically an enemy bomber.
By September 1944, it becomes clear that construction of the new jet engine is behind schedule. The Army decides to cancel Jack Northrop's revolutionary fighter. But Northrop knows his flying wing is the future of aircraft. He continues the project using his own money. On September 12, 1945, only a month after Japan surrenders, the jet-powered XP-79B is ready for its maiden flight. The pilot is Harry Crosby.
On its first flight, Crosby demonstrated that the airplane could fly successfully. And then, unfortunately, toward the end of that flight, he had a flight control problem caused by an air inlet valve on one wing not functioning properly. The airplane went out of control. Crosby was unable to escape it and was killed in the ensuing crash.
With the destruction of the sole XP-79, Jack Northrop abandons the fighter project and focuses on his flying wing bomber.
What we see with the Northrop Flying Wing is a vehicle that's ahead of its time. It's Imagineering at its very, very best. Unfortunately, the technology you needed to make it a success, the flight control technology primarily, was simply not available at that time.
While Northrop is experimenting with his radical flying wing, Hap Arnold remembers Lockheed's early studies in jet propulsion with the L-133. The United States must scramble to build an American jet fighter to take on the Germans. Lockheed is the obvious choice. A team of 50 of its best engineers begins building the new plane under the leadership of Clarence Kelly Johnson. Some, like Willis Hawkins, worked on the earlier L-133 project.
Kelly had promised that the airplane would be flown in 160 days from signing of the contract. And the Air Force had signed the contract. And so we had quite a row to hoe.
The Army Air Force calls the new plane the P-80 Shooting Star. To save time, the P-80 is a much simpler design than the L-133, but many features from the earlier project, including its wing, remain. The first flight takes place on January 8, 1944.
We must have had 20 Lockheed executives of one sort or another, and we all had to sit on the sand dunes. There was no place to stand around. The only paving was the runway. And off he went, and he put on a real magnificent first flight, including a high-speed pass right back in front of the dune. And it was pretty thrilling, but that's how the F-80 was born.
The P-80 is the first U.S. aircraft to exceed 500 miles per hour in level flight.